Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. With me is Tim Klauser, and we're going to be talking about how the Yakima City Council just passed a 6-month moratorium on halfway houses and secure transition facilities. And this is regarding where to place sexually violent predators. Tim, what's going on in Yakima?
Yeah. So what's going on in Yakima? It's more so a statewide reaction to what's going on. So, as many know, off of the Puget Sound or near Silicon, there's this place called McNeil Island, which is essentially where the state civilly commits what the court deems to be sexually violent predators. So, if the sex offender goes to prison, at the end of their prison sentence, the court says, "Look, this person is still probably a danger to society." They civilly commit them to this facility. So they go to this island. Essentially, think of it kind of like a lower level Alcatraz for sex offenders, and they're there potentially indefinitely for decades, the rest of their life. But every year, they get this opportunity to go before this panel, and a court can decide that after so long in this total confinement facility, they can be transferred to LRAs or less restrictive alternatives, and that would be these uh, community transmission facility or community transition facilities that Yakima placed a 6-month moratorium on. So essentially, the state has two of these facilities, one on the island outside of the total confinement facility and another in South Seattle, but they're looking to expand that network so they can discharge more people, do better planning in that case. But uh, it seems rightfully so. Yakima, other cities like Pasco, Richland, and other cities across the state aren't ready for this and don't they don't really want to have these facilities sited in their community, but they can't really preclude them altogether. State law prevents them from doing that, so they have to create a process and restrictions around siting them. So essentially, they just have to create zoning codes saying where these facilities can and can't go in Yakima and wherever else these facilities could go. But Yakima needs time to set up that process, so it passed this moratorium. Um, but essentially, it comes down to the state trying to expand its network so it can release these sexually violent predators into communities like Yakima. And Yakima's not quite ready for that, nor do they really want that at
Well,
all.
who can blame them? I mean, can you imagine living in a neighborhood where they put one of these things? I mean, good luck talking to your real estate agent for trying to sell.
Yeah, and there's restrictions that come with the facilities, but I think that is a huge concern for a lot of people, and that they might have these quote unquote safeguards that they have around the facilities and making sure that these people are monitored. But when it comes down to it, you have someone that's exiting an island where they're in a total confinement facility. They've already served their time in prison, and the state deemed them as sexually violent enough that they have to go on this island away from the rest of the state,
Right.
and now the state is letting these people out. The court is letting them out. They say their time is done, but I don't think anyone would reach out with open arms and say, "Hey, put this right next to my house. Put this in my school district," because I mean, this does pose a risk for those communities. There are safeguards, but it doesn't mean that it's without risk entirely.
I think the other thing is there's this debate about what's called recidivism. It's when somebody, a criminal commits a crime again after being released. And the problem with recidivism is it's about the definition. And some of them have a 2-year period where if you don't break the same law within 2-year period, but then you break it the day after those 2 years has passed, that's not considered recidivism. So that's one of the interesting discussions about that, because that's one of the arguments people make is, oh, you know, when they've gone through the program and they've gone through their sentence and all that kind of stuff, it's not as risky or whatever. I think the other thing is, if the predator reoffends, who's legally liable? Is the state, is corrections, who's bearing responsibility by allowing these people to be let out? Because there are some who would argue that there's some types of crimes that you just don't let they're too dangerous to be allowed to be, released into the public.
Mhm, and that's essentially the case for McNeil Island is that, these people, they go to prison, they have a high likelihood of recidivism, so they go to this McNeil Island, this total confinement facility, but the state still has to give them an opportunity to potentially get out to make their case, kind of like is someone going for probation after a certain amount of time. But it does come with risks. I will say, like, the some of the safeguards that they have is that if someone is released to one of these transition facilities, um, the facilities themselves are staffed 24/7. The residents there, so these sex offenders, they're wearing these ankle bracelets that are tracking them 24/7, and if they're leave a certain area, it sends an alert to certain people, and then that goes to the State Department of Corrections, and if they're violating any of the 50 to 60 rules that they have in place, then they're sent back to McNeil Island to the total confinement facility. So if they were to violate or to reoffend, they're definitely going to go, at the very least, back to McNeil Island, if not prison. But who's liable in those circumstances? I think that would likely play out in a lawsuit through the
Yeah.
courts.
I mean, we're seeing this with DCYF where the tort claims have increased dramatically, a separate
Mhm.
topic, but it's where there's been alleged negligence on the part of DCYF, and that's why there's been so much, tort claim owed. But, yeah, that's another thing to be thinking about, but obviously, the reality is these local government nobody wants to be the one to cite these facilities and say that they can be allowed there. No politician wants to have to run an reelection campaign where their opponent can say, "He voted to approve the citing." So, it
Mhm.
really is the question of where the buck stops and people not wanting to be blamed for something that they may not even want in their community. So it just it there's been numerous examples over the years of communities finding out that there's going to be one of these halfway houses sited in their neighborhoods, and they didn't even know about it. But their argument was or that they weren't informed. And there was a bunch of policy recommendations from I believe, the Sex Offender Policy Board on whether there should be certain types of notifications for things. Like, for example, if one of these places was gonna try and get a permit to be built, would the community need to know about it in advance and get notification? And one of the recommendations, I believe this was from a couple of years ago, is that no, they should not be notified.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would find that pretty alarming, and that's kinda how Yakima and cities like Pasco and the other places that have passed these moratoriums, they're trying to get ahead of that, but it will be interesting to see how Yakima and these cities that passed the moratoriums continue to respond, because this is only a temporary measure. Yakima's is in place for 6 months. That gives them, I believe, until the beginning of October, and at that point, the moratorium would expire, and the council would adopt zoning proposals from the planning commission to create some sort of process and some restrictions and rules around this. But at the same time, if we get to the end of this 6 month period when the moratorium is set to expire, there is an option for the council to extend it. If the planning commission hasn't fully developed its proposals yet. So it would be interesting to see if the cities that have passed these proposals, if they just try to extend these moratoriums as long as they can, whether that be from 6 months to a year or potentially longer, to try to see if, the state might pick other cities, maybe along the I-5 corridor and other parts of the state, to site these facilities instead of these cities that are still trying to develop the processes for them.
Right. Well, we'll keep an eye on this story. This is an important one, obviously, for people who live in these communities. So thanks for covering this, Tim. Listeners can keep up with this and other stories that we've written at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, TJ Martinell, and thank you for listening to this episode of Washington in Focus.